I'm not sure why it's showing 3 attempts, but anyway, it should be 2. Maybe I should delete this here and try this again. Okay, that should be 2. Alright, so at this point we can now roll the dice. Of course, USSR is at a great advantage on this die roll. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to click the roll dice button. Ooh, right off the start here, I'm showing that the US player had a low die roll. Because we're not using email, it's saying that it's not able to send an email verification of play. That's fine. I'm going to cancel this alert. So up comes the die roll with any modifiers. So our result is a 1. Next, it'll roll the die for the USSR player, and they rolled a 3 plus 3 is 6. So that was a very poor roll for the US player. The USSR player did a very good roll here, and in this case would be eliminating the enemy influence. So at this point, I would click the update button, and it would update Iran accordingly. Now we have control of Iran. Same as in placing influence with realignment rules, depending on the particular DEFCON status, that can determine whether you can perform realignment rules. If I change the DEFCON status to 2, for example, you'll notice that because of that restriction, we couldn't perform realignment rules in the Middle East, in Iran, and therefore we would have this exclamation mark. The DEFCON status can be quite easily changed and adjusted as needed by entering the number of the particular status. Again, we do have die modifiers that could be in effect for, I'm just going to re-enable this actually, die modifiers in effect for the realignment rules as well. Alright, so let's move on to the coup attempts. So I will indicate a coup attempt. Now we're the US player, and maybe we want to perform a coup attempt here. Israel doesn't look too good. That would be a tough one. So let's just make up a coup attempt example here, and we'll go with the Jordan. So you know what, actually I want to choose a country that is also a battleground. So let's try Egypt, just to demonstrate what the spreadsheet can do when we're performing coup attempts. So it'll automatically populate the fields again. We have 1 coup attempt with a 2-ops card, and we're going to roll our dice. We do need to select the country, and I indicated Egypt was the one we wanted to look at. So now we would roll our die. Again, if the coup attempt had a modifier to the die roll, it would be indicated here, or you can enter it yourself. Let's roll the dice and roll the die and see what happens. Looks like I rolled a 4. There was no modifiers to the die roll. We rolled a total of 4. Using the math that's specific to performing coup attempts, we had a total of 6 minus 2 by doubling the stability number, and that was a successful coup attempt, which added 2 USSR influence, which is indicated here in the middle box. I can now click update, and it will then add that influence to the map board. Next, it will prompt me to add the military operations for performing that coup attempt. I will say yes. And lastly, it will automatically degrade the DEFCON status. Now, by degrading that DEFCON status, you'll notice now that because we're in a lower DEFCON status level, I would not be able to perform a coup attempt. I could perform a coup attempt in Egypt, but I'm prevented because there's no enemy influence in Egypt anymore. Also on the map board, it indicates the military operations, and right now it's showing that the USSR has performed 2 military operations. Just quickly, this is the victory point track as well, and we will move on to the space race cards and other cards and how those are resolved. Let's go back to played cards. Let's say we want to play the Korean War as an event. I select that, and this involves some die rolling. So we can now use this last box called the space race / cards box to perform die rolling for specific cards that have events. Those cards would be if you're playing a card on a space race, or if you're playing a war card, or some other cards like Bear Trap and Olympic Games, so on and so forth. In this case, we're looking at Korean War, so I'll select that card. It automatically fills in that South Korea is the person who would be affected by this card. There's no modifiers indicated, However, we could actually add some modifiers here. If we look at the actual card and what it says, we subtract one die roll for every US controlled country adjacent to South Korea. So why don't we just say that we were having control of Japan rather. So I add 3 to Japan, add it to the one that's in there already. We now have a US controlled country by South Korea. That now indicates a modifier to the die roll, and also that the USSR is rolling. We need to roll a die within the range of 4 to 6. This will now, when I click the roll die button, add the result minus the modifier, and because we had a US controlled country besides South Korea, it modified the die roll just enough that we failed the roll attempt. It will though give us the military operations that we got for performing the card, and there we go. That was a failed roll attempt for the Korean War. The other example of playing operations, as I indicated, is if you were going to do a space race card. So in this example, let's say we wanted to play the Korean War card on the space race. We would, the first option here we have on the space race is Earth satellite. So we would select that from the drop-down box under the space race section. It will then determine how many ops card we need to have. Looking at the card, it is a 2 ops card. And now we need to roll a die between 1 and 3 to successfully dump this on the space race. Now this isn't a very good example. Typically you wouldn't dump your own war card on the space race, but this is just for demonstration purposes. I will roll the die. It indicates a roll with no modifiers for a total of 3. That was a successful roll. Now, because that was a successful roll, I would enter 1 into the space race field here to show that it was successful. If it wasn't, I would add 0, and that would be that. However, we were successful, and I'll add 1. It will then prompt based on what area we are on the space race, whether we get victory points or not. We'll click yes on that. Finally, we can look at the map board, and on the action round track, we show that the USSR player played a space race card here. That is a quick synopsis of using the different operations within the spreadsheet and how to play events. There's one other option we should talk about, and I'm going to switch players here to show this. It's now the US player's turn. The USSR has performed their action round, and we're going to look at the card hand. Now the US player, if he decides to play an event that applies to the USSR, that event is triggered. So let's say we would be doing, let's just say Romanian abdication. We'll click that and say yes, we want to add it to the spreadsheet. At this point it'll say, do we want to play this card for space race or UN intervention or missile envy? I'm going to say no, because we're going to trigger this event. We do that and it will prompt whether the US player or the USSR event should occur first. We'll go ahead and say yes. Then it indicates that we would need to fill in the ops column on the play cards worksheet when we perform our operations. So by canceling this, we'll see that now the USR player needs to perform their event. Typically I would close out the spreadsheet at this point and perform that event. Once that event was completed, it would be sent back to me, or you would switch players, and then the US player would have to perform their operations. So in this case, you're going to be selecting yes for event, and then again yes for operations to perform these different aspects. Now I just want to demonstrate how that is indicated on the spreadsheet. I'm going to actually just go ahead and delete that card and enter it again. Whoops, I have to disable card management just to show this example. Go in and enter 12 again. We'll say no to that. We're going to trigger the US event. If we look at the map board now, we'll show that it's the US player's turn, but the USSR has an event that needs to be resolved. If I go back in, and then once we click the ops, assuming the US player has resolved that, then the player can perform their operations, and this is indicated on this box as well. You'll notice the different fields specific to the player are automatically populated for performing operations on the map board, so you shouldn't have to switch between them. Alright, that demonstrates how to perform both events and operations. That concludes this particular video series tutorial on performing events and operations. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.